Welcome to the channel and the Temptress quarter scale build series. I'm currently working towards getting all of the components of this boat ready and assembled so that we can do a complete installation of everything. Everything you see here right now is just dry fit and roughly positioned and shaped. So in this video we're going to be doing the transom, which is the final piece of the puzzle before we can do that. So we did the framing in a previous video. In this video we're going to be looking at some of the other components of the transom and getting those put in place, ready to go on the boat. So let's get cracking. So let's take a look at what's going on with the transom then. If you remember in the previous video we did this outer framing. So we've got that made in the lamination jig, we've got the correct curvature set into place on that. But what we've got now are these components in the centre of the transom, so they form various different reinforcements that are going to help us to position the planking when it comes to putting the planking on the transom, and also just generally adding some strength where needed. So we've got this king beam that is going to overlap and run up into the deck beam of the transom frame in there. We've already got our keel, so we did that in the last video. So the keel is now dimensioned as this is in the model. We've got some extra material on the bottom edge here, which we'll trim down afterwards. You can see we've got this extra little pad here, so we don't have that yet. And you can see that that's going to cut through the transom framing. So we need to notch the transom frame out to sit over the keel. Now, one of the things that I needed to work out was how we're going to approach that, because if you look down here, we're actually going to lose almost all of that transom frame. If I cut that notch out now with just this outer frame in place, things are going to start to fall apart and go a bit wobbly, which I'm not too keen on. So what I think I might do is look at trying to make this little keel pad first. See if I can get that into place. I can then use that to not only set the height of my notch for the keel to run through, but also it'll help me to tie these two bottom sections together without creating a break in those. So I think we'll look at putting that in place first. We'll get a little bit of timber sized and we'll do that. Then we'll come and see what else we need to look at. Okay, so I have the transom framing in what I believe is now the correct place. So I've cut the notches on the back end of the stringers to correctly seat the bottom framing on the transom. So the lines that are marked on the stringer jigs refer to the outer transom framing. So that helps us to position the transom longitudinally and get that in the correct place. We've also got our transom legs, of course, that we set up before, so those are sat on waterline 1 when I'm not stood in the laser. And to be honest, this has actually taken me quite a long time. I haven't filmed everything I've done here, but there was a lot of moving things around and making sure that I've got everything in the right place, taking a lot of different measurements. The difficulty with the transom is that there is a lot of things going on here. It's very difficult to reference, and if something's not quite lining up, it's quite difficult to work out where that error is coming from and what's happening. So just to give you a couple of examples, if this transom isn't perfectly centered, you go off to one side or the other, then your chine height starts to decrease quite rapidly, so you see a difference in where the chine landings are. any number of things can cause stuff like that. So this leg, for example, if this isn't perfectly vertical, or if it's not in the correct place, if it's moved in slightly, that's going to have an effect of dropping the transom framing down. Also, if the transom is vertical in this plane, so I've been checking to make sure that the transom is vertical that way. All sorts of number of things really, and it gets to be a little bit of kind of chasing your tail around, but what I did in the end was I took a couple of measurements from various points, and one of the really helpful ones that I found was to measure on the 3D model from the point of the transom bottom here down to waterline 1. So what I managed to do there was just to take that measurement, and I dropped a ruler down until I broke the waterline 1 laser, so you can see it there. So you just lift that up until you're at 0, and then you can transfer that measurement to the point of the keel. So that gives you an extra check measure to know that the transom is at the correct height, which is really helpful. I also set up a vertical laser that ran down the center of the boat. I've got it set back on waterline 1 now, but you can see my little outline there of where I had it on the desk. And what I did there was I took the center line point on the transom rung on the strongback, and then I fired it all the way through the boat to a central point on the stem rung as well. So I knew that that laser was perfectly straight right the way through the boat. And then I've used that to transpose up and double check that my transom framing is in the center. You can also see I've got a batten on there at the moment, just picking up that line. So many little adjustments, little tweaks to these cutouts on the stringers. Another thing I did was just to put these braces on the stringers here, so as you're cutting these and moving things around, the stringers can alter in their position. Because this is all dry fit at the moment, it's fairly solid, it's pretty rigid, but it's all still movable when you start to work on it with a saw. So one of the things I had was the stringers ending up at different heights, so I've clamped them to make sure that they're at the same height, and also that they're not moving laterally as well. So there's lots of things to measure, and if you are taking measurements, be careful what you're taking your measurements from, and make sure that that's not what's moved and something else. So things like your center line throughout the boat and your waterline 1 are your kind of fixed ground references really that you can guarantee to work from. So there we go, I've got it in the right place and I'm happy that that's correct. So now what I'm going to start to do is to mark some of the cutouts. So we've got the keel pad piece cut that we did before, and that's going to go into the bottom section of the transom framing here, sit into that little V, and then it's going to line up with the bottom run of our keel. So I've just got a temporary batten in there at the moment, but that's how that's going to land. So I'm going to get that glued onto the transom, and once that's on, we'll be able to start to cut out this notch here in the framing that's going to receive our proper keel, and we'll do that next. So that little timber there really helped actually to perfectly position that pad. So I've got the inside edge of it here running straight down the center of the keel line, which you can see I've got aligned there. So frames in this section, they're all straight, so the planing surface of this boat is straight, so there won't be any curvature down the keel in this aft section. So we can just clamp a piece of straight timber on there and line that up. That's given me the correct height for the pad on the keel there, on the inner face of it, which the keel's going to sit onto, and it also helped me to get it nice and straight down the length of the boat, and it gave me a little clamping surface just to pin it in place whilst the glue set up. Obviously you're going to be doing this with epoxy on the full boat. I'm doing it with super fast Mitafix glue, so I'm pretty quick, but that's fixed in place anyway. So now we can take out the temporary batten, we can drop the proper keel in, and we can start to mark our cutout for the real keel, which is going to come through the transom framing. Okay, so that is in place. You can see the assembly there now. Fitted quite nicely actually, with a little bit of adjustment. So you can just about see that keel pad up in there. And that's just giving a little bit of extra support to the joint on the bottom frames there. Okay, so that is sorted. Next job, I think what I'm going to do is to put these little cheek sections in here. So we've got these big infills that go into the side of the framing here, and they do basically a couple of functions. So as you can see by the holes, they're going to support where the exhaust outlets go through the transom, and they're also just going to give us quite a bit of extra strength in the chine portion of the transom framing. So seeing as we're going to do the cutouts next for where the chines land, so we're going to pull these back through. We're going to cut out the underside of these to land the chines, same as we've done with the keel. So I want to get these cheeks in here really just to give a bit more support to the chine section of the transom framing. So let's get some timber ready for that. So the cheeks are just going to be plywood, and we can just to line them up, I've just used a spirit level to get a vertical line here and get the correct positioning for this part. We'll put that in place behind the framing and then just trace around that. Okay, so now we've got the cheeks glued in, we can start to do this cutout in here that's going to receive the lamination for the chine flat. So I'm just going to slide that back along into place so it's just butted up to the transom, and I'll just pin that in place with a couple of clamps. Okay, so we've got the king beam timber sized up, so we can run that from our keel pad up to our deck beam and just mark out where we're going to cut that little notch in this.
Okay, so with that king beam glued in place, I've got a centre line that I can work from now. So I'm just going to take some measurements out for where these other timbers have got to go. And I've just pulled them from the 3D model so we can get positioning for those. Okay, so there we have the finished transom assembly. So we've got all the vertical beams in place now, cheeks glued in, cutouts for the chines and cutout for the keel. So we'll trim these back when we do the final install into the boat. These are left loose for now, so these are just pressed in place, and that is because we're going to need to get the transom back out before we do the final assembly of everything. So we'll glue those in when we do that. But other than that, that's our complete assembly there. So that's the final bit sorted for our assembly. We are now ready to do a complete strip down and get this ready to glue everything in place permanently, which should be quite a nice, exciting step, because following on from that, we're going to be starting to do things like put the bottom on the boat, bevel down the stringers and the keel, and do a little bit more work on the chines, put the top side battens in, and the boat should really start to come to shape then, so that'll be quite an exciting stage. Okay, so that's the transom framing all sorted out. That is now every component that we need to do a complete assembly of this boat. So in the next video, that's what we're going to do. We're going to strip everything down, we'll do the epoxy coat phase, and then we'll do a final glue and install. So that'll be a pretty exciting stage to get to. On a bit of a broader note, here at Danley Boatbuilding, I've got a handful of really exciting things that I want to get into the pipeline going forwards. The biggest one of those is to try and get a new build boat underway. So I want to do that in the exact same way that I'm doing this quarter scale model for you here, but do it on a full-size boat and show the entire process start to finish. There are a couple of things that I've got in the pipeline that I hope can get that into place and make that happen, so that I can dedicate a bit more time to doing these videos and producing various other things as well. So one of the most recent things that I've implemented to try and start to make that happen and get the ball rolling on getting a full build underway is that I've set up a Patreon page. So if you guys are interested in supporting the business and supporting the channel a little bit more and making that process start to happen to get a proper build underway, that would be really great, and I'd massively appreciate any support that you're able to offer. So if you want to head over to the Patreon page, the link will be at the top of my YouTube channel, and it'll also be at the top of this video and in the description as well. There's various different benefits that I've set up in there, so there's going to be some extra behind the scenes content, video outtakes and things like that, just to hopefully return a little bit of the value to you guys if you're able to put something into the pot. So I really appreciate that. So check that out, and I'll massively appreciate any support that anybody is able to offer. So I'll see you in the next video when we do a big glue up. Cheers guys.